And hello, my fabulous students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about African slave trade between 1450 and 1750. This is Unit 4 of the AP curriculum. So let us begin. All right, guys. So we got slavery's been going on for a while, since pretty much the history of the world. Uh, so slavery was happening even in Africa. It was happening even before the Americas get discovered, and and there's a strong need for labor. So we have slavery in Africa itself. So many Africans owned other Africans as slaves. This was a common practice. In Islam, it was fine to have a slave or two, and so that isn't a new institution. Wealthy Africans showed their wealth by displaying their possessions, and a number of slaves would also be on display to show their vast wealth. Remember, slaves are pretty much property or possessions. So Muslim merchants would enslave Africans, and usually these Muslim merchants came down to the Swahili city-states by ship or boat, right? By maybe Arab dhows, and they would purchase slaves and bring them back up to them to the Middle East and to other regions of that area. So again, on the east coast of Africa, a lot of slavery was already going on for the most part. Slavery will never get as intense as it did when the Europeans started enslaving Africans and bringing them to Americas. However, slavery had been going on for quite some time in Africa before this, before the Americas was discovered. So the Americas are discovered, right? With new lands being acquired, there was plenty of opportunity for gold, silver, and they decided that growing sugar and other cash crops would be a great thing. However, they had all this new land. When I say they, the Europeans, right? Spanish, Portuguese, but the labor was scarce. So they had all this land that they could cultivate, but they didn't have the labor to fill it. So Europeans first started enslaving the natives to the Americas. They would enslave them to mine, to farm, but there are a few problems with that. For number one, they just kept dying. So, Europeans would enslave these natives, and then they'd start dying with close contact with these Europeans, and the diseases like smallpox, influenza, measles, all those things would take their toll on the population, so they would die. Natives, they would enslave them pretty much in their own land, so they kind of knew the landscape already, they were familiar with it. And lastly, after they escaped, they could just blend in because they already had a network of friends and family that lived in the area, so they could protect them. So they'd enslave them, they'd escape, and their friends that protected them and kept them out of the sight of their captors. So all these for these three reasons and a few others, I'm sure that it didn't really pan out very well to enslave the natives. Also, the natives' body constitution wasn't as robust, so it wasn't really built for like backbreaking kind of work. And so that was also another reason they it just didn't work out as well. So we also have indentured servants. So these are Europeans that receive passage, room, and board to the Americas. So they're getting over to the Americas, they're getting a place to stay in the Americas, and in return, they would labor under like a contract, right? An agreement. They'd have to labor for about at least 7 years or so, and then at the end of that, they would be set free and they would be in the Americas. Um, Anyway, so people did try the indentured servant. However, there's a few reasons why it didn't work. One, they just weren't used to the backbreaking agricultural work of the Americas, like the humid climate of the Americas was just very different from Europe. And two, they were committed for about 7 years. And then after that, they were set free. So we have labor that was temporary. So the Portuguese, remember the Portuguese, they come in contact with Africans as they're exploring the west coast of Africa, and they eventually find that they can go around the southern tip of Africa and get to the eventually to India and the Indian Ocean there, right? So during that time, Portuguese started increasing their contact with Africans, African tribes, African societies, while they were exploring that coast. Europeans began offering guns and alcohol to African leaders in exchange for slaves. Usually, these slaves were taken from the lower rungs of African society, like prisoners of war would be sold, criminals, servants, just the poor and the people that maybe leaders wanted to get rid of anyway because they were draining their resources. So a lot of these African leaders, somehow negotiated in their mind that it would be okay to do this as long as they kind of got rid of the riffraff in their societies. Um, and with the advanced technology of like firearms that the Portuguese and other Europeans were giving, this gave them advantage to dominate their enemies near them. So other African tribes are feuding with each other and maybe have been feuding for hundreds or thousands of years, who knows, right? But now they have advanced technology where they can overcome their enemies once and for all. And, the Portuguese are saying, look, we give you these firearms, will you just give us some POWs as you conquer your enemies with them? And so these agreements were made between African leaders and the Portuguese and Europeans. However, eventually, these African leaders, they can't stop the selling of slaves. Before they could sort of limit it, right? But at the end, you're starting to see that these slaves were being captured, but these weren't the riffraff anymore. These were like the elites, the nobles. I mean, some of these, I mean, the very family of these African leaders and tribes would also be sold into slavery eventually. So they at first it was okay if it was the lower rung riffraff, right? But then it became a big problem as they were taking the elites away now too, the people that actually contribute more to the society and to the economy, etc. So we have a horrific journey for these enslaved Africans. One, they would get captured by other Africans in Africa, and they'd be taken to what they call slave castles. Slave castles, were usually near the ocean, off the Atlantic, and or if they captured them on the east coast of Africa, then it'd be off the Indian Ocean. And this was considered the point of no return. They'd hold them there, and then that's where the Europeans would then take over from there. They would take them, they would bind them, and they would put them on a ship. And that's known as the Middle Passage. Is that journey on ship from Africa to the Americas? And while they were journeying, it would take about 6 weeks or so on a ship. The conditions were horrific, hot, humid, stinky, lack of food, lack of basic care. They were cramped in like sardines. Just an awful, terrible situation to be in. They just packed them so full in the ship because they realize that 10 to 15% aren't going to make it to the Americas due to the traveling alone. So they just packed them full, believing that 10% to 15 are gonna die anyway, and they want to get the most on their return. So it just awful, terrible treatment of human beings, and it truly is one of the great tragedies of world history. This African slave trade that came about. Um, anyway, so we're gonna see this going on from about 1500s to the mid 1800s. Um, so some of the places they were taken to, the two main places they're taken to are Brazil and the Caribbean. Now remember, the Portuguese, they received the land of Brazil in the Treaty of Tordesillas, which basically the line of demarcation gave them a portion of what they now call Brazil. So the Portuguese, instead of trying to, do the whole silver thing and extract all the materials from the Americas, they decided we have all this land, let's make cash crop. And it was a pretty smart move as far as money making goes. Okay? So they had all this land that needed, and if they could cultivate it properly, they could plant sugar cane and just sell it, and the demand for sugar was high and it was even getting higher. So the idea of a cash crop was born in the Americas. And a cash crop is a crop that it's not grown, like farmers usually grow something so they can eat it, support their family, and then sell whatever surplus is left and make a little profit, right? So it's grown primarily for subsistence. Normally, that's how farmers do this. However, a cash crop is grown just to be sold. It's not grown to for that farmer to live off it. Okay, so sugar is grown in large amounts on plantations as a cash crop. Same with tobacco. Tobacco will be grown as a cash crop. It's grown primarily to be sold and to make a profit. So, because of the climate in Brazil, it just was a nice place to grow sugar cane. Thus, most African slaves were transported to the Caribbean and Brazil than any other region in the Americas. 90% of African slaves to the Americas were transported to the Caribbean or South America. About 6% of slaves went to British North America. Just to kind of give you an understanding. So, slavery in Brazil. As the demand for profitable sugar increased globally, the demand for more African slave labor increased. African slave labor increased so dramatically that their descendants became the majority of the population in the Brazilian region. So many slaves were taken to Brazil because there was such a high demand for slavery that they almost represent the majority of the population then as time moves on. Life on the sugarcane plantation was backbreaking. Laborers suffered from poor nutrition, lack of adequate shelter, tropical heat, and rampant disease. Up to 10% of slaves perished each year in these plantations. However, so much sugar was produced on these that they began calling these plantations engenhos, which means engines in Portuguese. But it was this massive engine of sugar, and it produced and was so effective of getting and producing sugar that they called them engenhos. So we also have slavery in the Caribbean. So Spanish noticed great success. So we have the Spanish, and they noticed that there's a lot of success going on with the Portuguese in Brazil. And the Spanish are going to start like tweaking their approach here. I mean, instead of focusing on silver and mining all that silver and trying to go for precious metals to be sold later in China for Chinese goods, they're gonna start focusing very much like the Brazil, sort of like copying what they're doing. And so they're gonna stop focusing on mining silver. They're gonna go to like tobacco and sugarcane plantations. And eventually sugar is gonna start eclipsing silver mining as the main moneymaker in European empires. And really understand that there's only a set amount of silver, you know, silver is a it's a scarce resource. And so once you pull it out, I mean, you gotta, it's what I'm trying to say is growing a crop is something that can be somewhat replenishable. So it just makes sense to just grow a crop, especially when it's in high demand like sugar or tobacco, than to constantly try and dig deeper in dangerous mines to try to extract more and more silver. So the effects of slavery in Africa are thus: one, we have all this continued enslaving of African men is going to cause a decrease in population, okay, in Africa for a short time. Overall, it should be okay because the Columbian Exchange is going to bring over things like manioc, which is going to be a very starchy food that's going to give a lot of nutrients to Africans. However, in the short run, you're going to see a decline going on. This is going to be due to just people being taken from Africa, and that's just part of the consequence of it all. However, we're going to see an increase in polygyny, which is where one man marries more than one wife. And so that's going to be a popular practice. It's also popular in Islam and other religions as well. But because there are less men to be found in African societies, then it makes sense that those men who are there have more than one wife. Because there are more women that need, to be cared for and married and companionship, etc. And then also on the Indian Ocean, there's going to be slave trade. So here we're talking about all the slave trades going here, but there's also some going on in here as well. So we have Africans who are being enslaved by buyers from North Africa, Middle East, and India. Many were transported to Madagascar off the east coast here. So Madagascar is this island right here. And many workers, or many slaves, worked as like soldiers on seaports and shipping industries, household servants, etc. Um, so slavery in Africa is going to be going both ways. You got slavery happening in the Indian Ocean, and then you have slavery happening on the Atlantic Ocean as well. And so Africa kind of becomes this grounds by which they're trying to find people to make up for all the deficit in labor, because all this new land was discovered in Americas. Now they need people to till that land, so that demand gets much and much higher. So anyway, go ahead and write your summary, and we'll talk about this when we get back. Thanks. Bye bye.